The long winter. After Moon and I had scrounged for supper, the rest of Robert's sandwich plus a split bag of something crunchy that we found outside the back door of the Wagging Tail, we returned to Nassau Street. Never before had we walked directly down the main street of Claremont, not during the day and not during the night. But not a single person was about, so we felt more free than usual. Most of the store windows were still lit up, and as we passed them we could see silent figures dressed in bright colors, and sparkly decorations and toys and candy and ribbons. When we reached the corner where the bakery stood, we turned down a side street called Tinker Lane. The windows of most of the houses here were lit too, but we felt brave enough on this quiet, quiet night to pause in the front yards and try to see what was happening inside the houses. Moon and I had not peeked in many houses during our lives, but we had peeked in a few, and this was the first time we had ever seen fir trees in people's homes. They were smaller than the one on Nassau Street, but they were strung with lights like the big tree and also hung with glittery decorations. We could see people standing by some of the trees, and they were smiling or laughing. In one house we saw a little girl jumping up and down. In another we saw a boy tying a ribbon around the neck of a fuzzy black dog. Moon and I wandered the streets until most of the lights had winked out. Then we spent the night huddled in the little space between two closed dumpsters in the parking lot at the supermarket. It snowed during the night. Not much, though, just enough to add a clean layer to the snow that had already fallen. Only a few flakes drifted down onto Moon and me in our hideaway, and we awoke the next morning feeling warm and mostly dry. We were just creeping out into the parking lot, looking around for signs of people or other dogs, when we heard the talking of humans and ducked back behind the dumpsters. "They're here every single morning," a woman's voice was saying. "How many are there, do you think?" asked another voice, a man's. "It varies," said the woman. "They're not a pack. Sometimes only a couple are here, sometimes 5 or 6. They're pretty wary of one another, but they're always here." "Well, this is a nice thing you're doing, a Christmas present for the stray dogs." I didn't hear anything else for a moment or two, so I stuck my snout out from between the dumpsters and looked in the direction of the voices. There they were, the woman and the man. The woman was very tall, and the man was very short. They were dressed in warm clothes, scarves and mittens and big coats and knitted hats, and they were spooning something into aluminum pie tins. Hamburger! My nose told me that right away. "It's not their fault they're strays," said the woman. "They shouldn't have to eat garbage all the time." She paused. "Some of them are practically starving." Moon and I waited and watched. When the woman had finished spooning the hamburger into the pie tins, she and the man placed the tins around the parking lot. Then they climbed into a car and drove away. The second the car was out of sight, Moon and I made a dash for the nearest tin. From out of other hiding places rushed 3 more dogs. In moments all the food was gone, and the other dogs had disappeared. The sun came out, and Moon and I basked in it, our stomachs full. We spent the night, I now know that it was Christmas night, in the spot between the dumpsters. The next morning we were awakened earlier than usual by the sound of voices. The tall woman was back. This time she was with another woman, a woman with the longest hair I had ever seen. "Look," I heard the tall woman say, "all the tins are empty. Lick clean. Let's get them filled up. We have to hurry. I want to do this before the stores open. I don't think the dogs will come out for food if anyone's around." "And also," said the woman with the long hair, "you'd better do this without being seen." The women worked quickly. They walked around the parking lot, filling each tin with more hamburger. When they were finished, they climbed into a car. But I noticed that this time they drove to the edge of the lot and stopped. Moon and I waited for a moment. The car didn't move, but 2 big dogs rushed for the pie tins anyway, so Moon and I did the same. Before we were done, 2 more dogs arrived. In no time the plates were empty. The women left then. They were back the next day. "I brought extra plates," said the tall woman, "and more hamburger. I didn't realize how quickly the dogs would eat everything." "Maybe we should feed them twice a day," said the woman with the long hair. "That's a good idea. We'll have to switch to dog food, though. We can't afford to keep buying meat. They can't live on hamburger alone anyway. They need more vitamins." That was how Moon and I got lucky, at least for a while. The woman and their friends visited the parking lot of the supermarket every morning before the store opened, and every evening after it closed, leaving out plates of wet and dry food for the dogs who had made their homes in Claremont. Moon and I continued to steer clear of the other dogs. They were nearby, of course, We passed them everywhere, and we all vied for the same food in town, whatever the garbage cans or pie tins had to offer. But I never forgot about the encounter with the dogs at the rest stop and trusted no one except Moon. That winter in Claremont, might have been cold and snowy, but for once Moon and I didn't have any trouble finding food. Every morning we breakfasted at the parking lot. Then we would wander discreetly through Claremont, watching Robert and Lisa and Sarah and Amanda, watching as the Christmas decorations were taken down and in their place sprouted hearts and cupids, and later eggs and rabbits and chicks and baskets and candy. In the evening we would eat dinner in the parking lot again and then spend the night between the dumpsters. We noticed that the other stray dogs now slept in the parking lot as well, and that there were more of them. By the time the air was growing warmer and crocuses and daffodils were starting to bloom in Claremont, we noticed something else. Occasionally, a large dark-colored van was parked in the lot early in the morning. If it was there, the woman wouldn't feed us. They would drive by the lot and not return until the van had left. Then they would feed us if the supermarket hadn't opened, but sometimes we missed our breakfast because of the van. One morning, a bright, warm morning with sniffs of spring in the air, the very tall woman and the woman with the long hair arrived at the parking lot, looked around for the van, and then hurriedly filled the pie tins, placed them around the lot, and drove away. Moon and I and several other dogs had rushed to the tins and were beginning our breakfast when the van eased into the lot and glided to a silent stop. I kept my eye on it as Moon and I bolted our food. The front doors of the van opened quietly. Two men slipped out, each carrying a long pole with a loop of rope attached to one end. They pointed to the dogs, eating from the pie tin nearest the van, and ran toward them, poles extended. The dogs, a little one Moon-sized and a bigger one, didn't see the men. In a flash, each man threw his loop around the neck of the dog and pulled tight. Caught! The dogs were caught in the ropes. They yipped and barked and fought, jerking back and forth, pulling and snapping, but the men held tight to the poles and tugged the dogs toward the van. They threw open a door at the back and hauled the dogs into cages. Then they slammed the door shut. They stood at the lot, poles in hand. "Do you see any of the others?" asked one of the men. "Nope, they disappeared fast. They'll be back tomorrow, or maybe tonight. Those people were feeding them at night, too, I think. All right, well, let's get these two to the shelter. We'll come back here later." That night, after the supermarket had closed, Moon and I waited cautiously between our dumpsters. The women arrived, put out our food, and left. The moment they drove away, the van pulled into the parking lot. Moon and I ran into the woods and circled around to Nassau Street. We found supper behind the wagging tail and slept under the awning of the back entrance to Robert's jewelry store. The next morning we made our way to the supermarket again. The van returned. It was time to leave Claremont. On a windy day with clouds gathering on the horizon, Moon and I set off through the woods and left the town behind us. Moon. Spring that year was long and slow and dry and warm. Moon and I had little trouble finding food. We were smarter now. Instead of avoiding towns, we sought them out. But we were careful to linger mostly at the edges and not to stay too long. Whenever we arrived at a new town, we explored it carefully. We studied its rhythms and looked for the pet stores and watched to see if anyone might be feeding stray dogs. We ate mostly in darkness, and we paid attention if we saw a van that was driving slowly. We stayed in each town for only a few days, then we lived in the woods for a time, keeping our hunting skills sharp, and then we moved on to another town. In one town we slept behind a woodpile at a house where two women and two little girls lived. The women caught sight of us and set out dishes of food and water and seemed very kind. Outside another town we discovered a small farm with a barn that housed a donkey named Tico and a cow named Bluebell. We slept in an empty stall for 3 nights, drinking water from a large tub and dining on birdseed grain and little red squirrels. Then we moved on. As the moon changed from the tiny curl of a cat's claw to a half-closed eye, and the days grew longer and even warmer, my friend and I slept in towns, on farms, and once in an open field where the nighttime sounds reminded me of an evening at the Marians when I had watched mine trot through their yard. One day, one of the longest of the year, when the sun rose early and set late, Moon and I left a town called Republic. We hadn't liked the town. As soon as we'd arrived, we'd seen a man kick a dog that was tied up in a yard on a very short chain. Later, after we had discovered a feed store in town, we were waiting in some bushes for the store to close, when a group of boys and girls who were not little but were not grown-ups yet either, discovered our hiding place and threw rocks at us. One rock with a sharp point on it hit me behind my ear, and a large one landed square on Moon's back. We were on our way out of Republic, my head bleeding slightly, when we came upon a grocery store where a man was putting some cheese and stale bread and the ends of sausages in a bowl by the back door. He saw us as we were running away, paused, then added more sausage to the bowl before he went inside. So Moon and I waited until dark and ate our supper at the store. Then we spent the night in an abandoned gas station. The next morning we left Republic behind us. We had wakened early, checked the bowl at the grocery store, found it still lit clean from the night before, and set out. Very quickly we reached some woods. We trotted through them, our stomachs empty, but not grumbling too loudly. We had just passed through a small clearing when we came to a sleepy mountain road and spotted 2 chipmunks perched on a fallen log on the other side. Moon sprinted across the road, and I was after her in a flash. We were so intent on surprising the chipmunks that neither of us heard the truck that came thundering around a bend in the road, not until it was almost upon us. I looked up in time to see the terrible blue thing, like an enormous dog with big yellow eyes and a row of gleaming teeth, bearing down on us. I heard a person scream, and the truck made a loud squeal, and I jumped backward. Moon had already reached the middle of the road, though, and the truck hit her at high speed and sent her flying. It only clipped me, but it clipped the shoulder that had been injured when George had thrown Bone and me away, and I couldn't move, so I lay at the edge of the woods. I yelped for Moon, but I didn't hear any sound from her. The truck flew past, still squealing, and its tires locked in place as it skidded down the road, leaving long marks that swerved from side to side and finally ended as the truck came to an abrupt stop. I heard more screams, and then the screams became voices, and I couldn't see who was speaking. "A dog! You hit a dog!" "No, 2 dogs. I think there were 2. They came out of nowhere. It wasn't your fault. They just ran right in front of me. Is everyone okay?" "I'm okay. I'm okay." "Is the truck okay?" "I think so." A little silence followed, and I lifted my head to see where Moon was. She had landed by the log. The chipmunks had disappeared, of course, and she lay still. I dropped my head back to the ground. I heard footsteps running in the road then, and soon I could see several pairs of legs. 2 feet with sneakers on them stopped next to me. A girl who was about the age of Matthias, Marion's brother, leaned over and peered into my face. She put out a hand and rested it on my back for a moment. "This one's alive. I think it's going to be okay," she said. I watched some other sneakers cross the road. A woman stooped down beside Moon. She ran her hand down Moon's back and rolled her over gently. "This one's dead, I'm afraid. Let's take both of them to the vet." "I'll bring the truck back here," said a man, and a 3rd pair of sneakers walked down the road toward the truck. The girl sat next to me at the edge of the woods and put her arms around me. "Be careful," the woman called to her. "I don't want you touching a strange dog." "Well, it's not bleeding or anything," the girl replied. I tried to figure out how many people had been in the truck. There was this girl and the woman who was sitting with Moon and the man who had gone for the truck, and now I realized there was a boy too. He crossed the road and knelt beside Moon and the woman. I wanted to look at Moon again, but my head had grown very heavy, and as the girl stroked my back, I fell asleep. I woke up when I felt a pair of strong arms lift me from the ground. The arms belonged to the man, and he set me carefully in the back of the truck. A moment later he laid Moon next to me, and I could tell that she was indeed dead. I had seen many dead things in my life, and now Moon was one of them.